In a quiet neighborhood in the Boston suburbs, lined with red brick houses, Margaret Wilson gazed at the twilight sky from her study window. She worked as an editor at a local publishing house, trusted for her keen literary sensibility and meticulous work. "Mom, dinner's ready." At the sound of her 14-year-old daughter Emily's voice, Margaret snapped back to reality. "Thank you, I'll be right there," she replied, closing her laptop. Before leaving the study, she unconsciously caressed her wedding ring. She and Richard had been married for 15 years. Her husband, an investment banker, had provided a comfortable life for her and Emily. But lately, he'd been coming home later, and his business trips had increased. When Margaret entered the dining room, Emily had already finished setting the table. "Where's Dad?" Margaret asked, and Emily shrugged. "He's not home yet. I called him, but he said his meeting is running late." "I see," Margaret answered quietly. Recently, Richard had been spending less time at home. Were his meetings and dinners with clients really what he claimed? A doubt crossed her mind, but she quickly dismissed it. Richard was a responsible, good husband. There was no reason to doubt him. "Mom, what do you want for your birthday the day after tomorrow?" Emily asked during dinner. "Well, I haven't really thought about it. Just having you is enough." "But we should do something special," Emily insisted earnestly. Margaret smiled. "I wonder if Dad has prepared a present." Emily continued. "Well, he's been so busy lately, I don't even know if he remembers." Just then, they heard the front door open. "I'm home," Richard's voice called out, and Emily jumped up to greet him. Margaret remained at the table, quietly waiting for his return. Richard entered the dining room still in his suit, hugging Emily. His face showed signs of fatigue. "Sorry I'm late." "The client wouldn't stop talking," he said, kissing Margaret on the cheek. "It's all right. Let's eat while it's still warm," Margaret replied. During dinner, Richard barely spoke about work, instead listening to Emily's school stories. Margaret listened to their conversation while suppressing her small anxieties. "By the way, Maggie," Richard called her by her nickname. "About your birthday the day after tomorrow, something unfortunate has come up." His expression turned apologetic. "I suddenly have to go to Chicago on a business trip. I don't think I'll be able to get back that day." Margaret couldn't hide her disappointment. "I see. That's fine. Work comes first, after all. But I promise we'll celebrate properly when I get back," Richard said with a serious look. Margaret nodded slightly. That night, lying alone in bed, Margaret decided to contact her friend Linda. "Richard will be away on a business trip for my birthday. I'm thinking of having a small dinner party. Can you come?" "Of course." Linda's cheerful voice rang through the phone. "Why not invite Eleanor too?"
Can you imagine making $10,000 a month just from YouTube, all from home? That's exactly what I did with Reddit Stories. No face, no voice. Check the link in the description if you're curious.
"She's a great cook." Eleanor, their neighbor, was like a mother figure to Margaret. "Yes, I'll ask her tomorrow." As she made preparations, Margaret's mood began to brighten. Even without Richard, she could have a pleasant birthday with her friends. However, the day before her birthday, Richard seemed somehow different. He would check his mobile phone several times, then quickly put it back in his pocket. When Margaret spoke to him, his responses were distracted. He seemed to be hiding something. "What time are you leaving tomorrow?" she asked, and Richard looked somewhat startled. "Oh, early morning. I was planning to leave before you wake up." Margaret said nothing more. The next morning, she noticed that Richard had already left. A short handwritten note was placed by her pillow. "Happy birthday. Let's celebrate properly when I return. I love you." Feeling a little lonely, Margaret went about her usual morning routine. Emily prepared a special breakfast and gave her a handmade card. Tonight, Linda and Eleanor are coming over, so we're having a little party, Margaret told her daughter. Isn't that a boring party? Emily said. Dad's not even here on your birthday. It can't be helped. Dad is busy, Margaret answered with forced bravery. In truth, she was thinking the same thing. When she returned home from work, Margaret received a message from Linda. Something urgent came up, so I'll be a bit late. I'll come with Eleanor at 7, so be ready by then. And at 7, the intercom rang. When she opened the door, Linda and Eleanor were standing there. Happy birthday, they said in unison. Come on, hurry. Hurry. Where are we going? Margaret was confused. There's no time to explain, Linda said with a laugh. Put your coat on and come with us right away. Margaret, half forced into the car, had no idea what the two were planning. The car headed downtown and stopped in front of an upscale restaurant, Le Chateau. What are we doing here? Margaret began, but her words were cut off by the sight before her. Richard, dressed in a suit, was standing at the entrance of the restaurant. Surprise, he said with a beaming smile. The Chicago trip was a lie. I was planning a special night for you. Margaret was stunned. But why? Come on, let's go inside. Everyone is waiting, Richard took her hand. In a private room of the restaurant, close friends had gathered. Her colleague Jessica, college friends Sarah and David, and even Emily were already seated. Surprise, everyone said in unison. Margaret was so moved that tears welled up. She was deeply touched that Richard had planned all this for her. Her anxieties and doubts vanished in an instant. So this is why you've been acting differently lately, she whispered in Richard's ear. I'm sorry for lying to keep it a secret, he replied apologetically. But I wanted to see your face. The dinner was sumptuous, the conversation flowed, and laughter never ceased. Margaret enjoyed a genuinely pleasant time for the first time in a while. After dessert, Richard stood up and took a glass in his hand. Today, we have gathered to celebrate the birthday of my beloved wife, wonderful mother, and talented editor, Margaret, he said with emotion in his voice. 17 years since I met her, 15 years of marriage. She has remained the light of my life. Margaret's heart swelled at her husband's words. She felt apologetic for having harbored doubts and suspicions about him recently. And tonight, I have prepared a special gift, Richard took a small box from his pocket. This was specially ordered just for you. When he opened the box, inside was a beautiful wristwatch. It had a simple yet sophisticated design, with a deep blue face. The band was slender and silver, beautifully shimmering in the light. This is... Margaret was speechless. Do you like it? I had it custom-made especially for you. Look at the back of the face. Richard took out the watch and turned it over. There, engraved, were the words, with eternal love, or. It's too beautiful, Margaret said, holding back tears. Thank you. Richard gently wrapped the watch around her wrist. It fits perfectly, he took Margaret's hand and kissed it. Her friends expressed admiration and applauded. Eleanor had tears in her eyes. What a wonderful gift, she smiled at Margaret. Towards the end of the party, Linda leaned close to Margaret and said, What a lovely watch. It looks expensive. Yes, Richard says he had it specially ordered, Margaret replied proudly. So that's why he'd been acting strangely lately, Linda said happily. I'm sorry I doubted him too. And I'm sorry for doubting my husband. Margaret smiled shyly. On the way home, Emily fell asleep in the back seat, and Margaret and Richard conversed quietly. Thank you so much, Margaret said, holding her husband's hand. It was the best birthday. I wanted to celebrate in a way worthy of you, Richard answered without taking his eyes off the road. That watch is special. I hope you'll cherish it. Of course. I'll wear it every day. Margaret gazed at the watch. For the next few days, Margaret wore her new watch daily. All her colleagues at the publishing house noticed the beautiful timepiece and admired Richard's thoughtful gesture. Margaret treasured the watch as a token of her husband's love. However, about a week after she began wearing the watch, a mild rash appeared on Margaret's right wrist. At first, she thought the watch band might be too tight and loosened it a bit. But instead of disappearing, the rash gradually spread. Could that be a metal allergy? Linda pointed out one day when they were having lunch together. Maybe, but I've never had a metal allergy before, Margaret replied, puzzled. And Richard said he used good metal for the special order. But it doesn't look good, Linda said with concern. Why not see a doctor? Margaret considered the suggestion but didn't want to worry Richard. She thought telling him there was a problem with his specially chosen gift would disappoint him. I'm sure it will get better soon, she tried to reassure her friend. However, far from improving, the rash began to worsen. Moreover, her overall health seemed to deteriorate. She would wake up with mild headaches and feel fatigued throughout the day. Still, Margaret refused to remove the watch. One night, Richard noticed the condition of her wrist. What's this? He asked with concern. Just a small rash. It's nothing serious, Margaret answered lightly. Richard stared at her wrist. It might be the watch. Maybe you should take it off for a while. But it's a precious gift from you, Margaret resisted. Your health is more important, Richard said gently. Let's take it off for a while and see how it goes. Margaret reluctantly agreed and slept without the watch that night. But the next morning, she had it back on her wrist. Wearing this token of Richard's love gave her a sense of security. Maggie, are you really okay? You don't look well, Richard said with concern at breakfast a few days later. I'm just a bit tired, Margaret answered with a smile. However, she herself was beginning to worry about her health. She had started experiencing occasional dizziness and nausea. Finally, at Emily's strong urging, Margaret decided to visit their family doctor, Dr. Johnson. She explained about the rash and her poor health, and mentioned the possible connection to the watch. There certainly is a possibility of metal allergy, Dr. Johnson said. However, it's unusual for a common metal allergy to cause such significant health issues. Let's do some detailed tests. But even after conducting blood tests and other examinations, no noteworthy abnormalities were found. The test results show no particular problems, the doctor said. It might be due to recent stress or fatigue. I recommend you take some rest. Margaret was somewhat relieved but not entirely convinced. There was a clear pattern. The rash improved when she took off the watch but worsened when she wore it. On her way home, she stopped in front of an old pawn shop called Golden Pawn. She wasn't sure why she did so. But somewhere, she felt an impulse to hear an expert's opinion about this watch. The interior of Golden Pawn exuded an atmosphere as if time had stopped. Old wall clocks hung on the walls, and various antique jewelry and coins were displayed in glass cases. Behind the counter sat an elderly man with white hair, appearing to be appraising a gem using a magnifying glass. Margaret slowly entered the store. A small bell above the door rang, and the old man looked up. Welcome. Are you looking for something? His voice was warm, and his eyes were kind. Actually. Margaret hesitated for a moment, then removed the watch from her wrist. I'd like you to look at this watch, if you could. The old man took the watch in his hand and introduced himself. I'm Albert Finch, the owner of this shop. This is a lovely watch. Is it recent? Yes, my husband gave it to me as a birthday present last month, Margaret replied, showing him the rash on her wrist. But when I wear it, I get this rash on my wrist, and I start feeling unwell. I went to the doctor, but they couldn't figure out why. Albert frowned and took out a specialized tool set from under the counter. May I look inside? Margaret nodded. With skilled hands, Albert opened the back of the watch. His expression froze when he looked inside. This is... His voice trembled. Where did you get this? I told you, it was a birthday present from my husband, Margaret replied, growing anxious. Albert's face turned pale. He quickly closed the back and put the watch down, then pulled out an old newspaper clipping from under the counter. Where did your husband say he bought this watch? Albert's voice was filled with urgency. He said he had it custom made. Margaret felt a growing unease. Is there a problem? After hesitating, Albert decisively showed her the clipping. It was a newspaper article from about 5 years ago. The headline read, "Gift of Love Becomes Murder Weapon." The article detailed the case of a man who had attempted to poison his wife using a watch made of a special alloy. Margaret gasped. This watch, though it looks like a luxury item, is actually something terrible, Albert explained quietly. It's made with a special alloy that gradually releases harmful substances that are absorbed through the skin when worn for extended periods. 5 years ago, a man was arrested for trying to poison his wife with a similar watch. In Margaret's mind, various events began to connect like puzzle pieces. Richard's recent strange behavior, the surprise party, and the specially ordered watch. No, she said with a trembling voice. That's impossible. My husband would never do such a thing. Albert looked at Margaret with a serious expression. Go to the police immediately. Right now. Confused and terrified, Margaret left the shop with the watch. Though her head was in turmoil, one thing was clear: she needed to go to the police. When she arrived at the police station, Margaret tried to explain the situation to the female officer at the desk, but her words came out fragmented. Watch, husband, poison. Please calm down and speak slowly, the female officer said gently. Her name tag read Detective Jennifer Davis. Jennifer was a woman of about 45, with gentle eyes that still conveyed sharpness. She led Margaret to a private room and listened to her story patiently. With trembling hands, Margaret produced the watch and explained what Albert from the pawn shop had told her, along with her recent health issues and the rash. Is this true? That my husband is trying to kill me? Jennifer carefully took the watch and placed it in an evidence bag. We'll have this examined. I also want you to undergo some medical tests. If this watch is indeed releasing toxic substances, there should be traces in your body. Margaret nodded amidst her fear and confusion. But please don't say anything to Richard. If he really is. I don't know what he might do if he finds out. Don't worry, Jennifer held her hand. Your safety is our priority. Let's gather evidence first. That evening, Margaret underwent detailed examinations at the hospital. Blood tests, urine tests, and even samples from the rash on her skin were taken. She was told it would take several days for all the test results to come back. On her way home, Margaret fought against occasional bouts of dizziness and thought about what to do. If Richard really was trying to kill her, how should she act with him now? She needed to behave normally. She couldn't let him become suspicious. When she arrived home, Richard wasn't back yet. Emily had said she was staying at a friend's house. Margaret stood alone in the kitchen and mechanically began preparing dinner. I'm home, Richard's voice was heard, and the sound of the front door closing. Margaret took a deep breath and feigned calmness. Welcome home, she said with a smile. How was your day? Richard kissed her on the cheek. The usual. And you? His eyes seemed to search for her wrist. Where's the watch? With her heart nearly leaping out of her chest, Margaret calmly replied, it was acting up a bit, so I took it to a jewelry shop. Seems like it needs some adjustment, so I'll pick it up in a few days. I see, an expression flashed across Richard's face for an instant. That's a shame. I liked seeing you wear that watch. During dinner, Margaret put all her energy into maintaining conversation. She talked about Emily's school, her work, and made small talk, trying not to appear unnatural. Richard also seemed normal, but occasionally, he would glance at her in a way that seemed to be observing her. After dinner, while Richard was in the shower, Margaret's mobile phone vibrated. It was a message from Detective Jennifer. Preliminary test results are in. Toxic substances have been detected from the watch. The same substances have been found in your blood sample. Let's talk in detail tomorrow morning. Be careful tonight. Contact me immediately if anything happens. Margaret read the message with trembling hands and immediately deleted it. The next morning, Margaret left home early. She told Richard she had a morning meeting at the publishing house, but she was actually heading to the police station. Detective Jennifer was already waiting and led her to a private room. The detailed test results are in, Jennifer said with a stern expression. The watch definitely contains toxic substances. It's designed to gradually release toxins through a reaction with the special alloy and body temperature. Margaret clutched her coffee cup with trembling hands. Why would my husband do such a thing? We've already called in Richard Wilson for questioning, Jennifer continued. With the evidence we have, we'll be hearing his explanation. At that moment, another detective entered the room. Mr. Wilson has arrived. Jennifer gave Margaret a small nod. Please wait in another room. Let's hear what he has to say first. Margaret watched Richard's interrogation through a surveillance camera monitor. He entered looking confused. Why was I called here? I'm worried about my wife, she's missing. Richard couldn't hide his agitation. Your wife is in a safe place, Jennifer replied calmly. Mr. Wilson, could you explain about this watch? She produced Margaret's watch in an evidence bag. Richard's expression stiffened for a moment. That's the watch I gave my wife for her birthday. Is something wrong? Where did you purchase this watch? At a luxury watch store in Boston called Elegant Time. I had it custom made. Richard answered confidently. I have the receipt. He took out a folded paper from his wallet. Jennifer received it and examined it carefully. This is interesting. We found that a store called Elegant Time doesn't exist. The color drained from Richard's face. There must be some mistake. Furthermore, this receipt has been forged, Jennifer continued calmly. This watch contains special toxic substances designed to be absorbed through the skin when worn for extended periods. The same substances have been detected in your wife's blood. Richard was speechless. I don't know. It can't be. We also found interesting search history on your computer. Jennifer spread out some documents. Special alloy, metal allergy, delayed action poison. All these searches were conducted from your laptop. The temperature in the room seemed to drop suddenly. Richard's attitude changed, and he demanded a lawyer. I won't say anything more until my lawyer gets here. In the other room, Margaret couldn't stop her tears as she watched her husband's transformed appearance. The man she had loved and trusted for 15 years was now revealed to have been trying to kill her. Hours later, police conducted a search of Richard's office and home. A small notebook was found in his desk drawer with messages to someone referred to as V. New evidence was found during the search, Jennifer reported to Margaret. Your husband appears to have been having an affair with a woman named Vanessa Parker. She's a new secretary at his company, and their relationship seems to have begun about 10 months ago. Margaret nearly collapsed. Vanessa. She had heard that name before. Richard had mentioned her several times as his capable new secretary. Furthermore, Richard took out a large life insurance policy on you 6 months ago. Jennifer showed the documents. In particular, there's a clause stating that in case of accidental death, the insurance payout would be doubled. "This is not a coincidence," Jennifer said with conviction. "It was a premeditated crime." That evening, Richard and Vanessa were arrested. The charges were attempted murder and insurance fraud. Richard initially denied all charges, but deleted files were recovered from his laptop, providing decisive evidence. A message from Richard to Vanessa stating, "I love you. Just a few more months of patience. Once she's gone, we can start a new life with the insurance money," exposed their plan. Preliminary hearings began. The prosecution argued that Richard and Vanessa had conspired to gradually poison Margaret. The defendant gave the victim a watch made of special alloy, said the prosecutor. This watch releases toxins gradually when used for a long period, harming the user's health. It would likely have been treated as death from unknown causes in the end. Richard's lawyer claimed the watch was just a gift, and he didn't know about its harmful nature, but the evidence found on his computer and the messages with Vanessa contradicted this. Margaret decided to separate and took Emily to stay at her friend Linda's house. "You were right not to trust that man," Linda said. "I thought something was off when your health started declining." Emily was confused by these sudden events. "Dad tried to kill Mom?" she asked incredulously. "Emily," Margaret embraced her daughter. "Dad had problems. But always remember that you're my brave girl." After a 3-month trial, the jury unanimously found Richard guilty. The judge sentenced him to 20 years in prison for attempted murder and insurance fraud. Vanessa received an 8-year prison sentence as an accomplice. On the day of sentencing, Margaret read a statement in court. "For 15 years, I loved and trusted you. You were my husband and Emily's father. But you betrayed everything we built. Why? Why did you try to kill me?" Richard spoke for the first time. "I did love you once. But people change. After meeting Vanessa, I began to want a new life. Divorce would take too long. And I needed the money." The courtroom fell silent. The judge finally said, "Your actions represent the most despicable betrayal. For a person who should protect their family to plan to harm them is the greatest crime." Despite her deep emotional wounds, Margaret was relieved that the truth had been revealed and that she had been able to protect her life. She had been saved by Albert, the pawn shop owner she had visited by chance. Without his knowledge and courage, Margaret might have gradually lost her life. After the trial, Margaret visited Albert. "You saved my life," she said with profound gratitude. "How did you recognize the true nature of that watch?" Albert's expression turned somewhat sad. "The man in that article from 5 years ago, he was the son of a close friend of mine. He's serving time for trying to kill his wife. Since then, I've been researching these special watches. The moment I saw your watch, I knew it had the same structure." "Thank you so much," Margaret held his hands. "I don't know how I'll go on with my life." "One day at a time," Albert replied gently. "You've been given a second life. Don't waste it." 6 months later, one morning, Margaret was making coffee in the kitchen of her new apartment. The morning sun shining through the window illuminated her face. She was a bit thinner than before but had regained her health. "Mom, did you have bad dreams again today?" Emily asked worriedly at breakfast. "A little. But they're much better than before," Margaret smiled in response. "Is the counseling helping?" "Yes, things are gradually getting better. The nightmares are becoming less frequent too." Thanks to trauma counseling and the support of her friends, Margaret was slowly beginning to move forward. The toxic substances had been completely eliminated from her body, and her health was gradually recovering, but overcoming the psychological shock wasn't easy. Every Saturday, visiting Golden Pawn had become a habit for Margaret and Emily. Albert had become like a second father to them, and they enjoyed listening to his stories about watches and jewelry. "This ring is from the 1920s, Art Deco style, with a very rare design," Albert was explaining to Margaret one day. It's beautiful. I'm truly grateful for your knowledge. No, I was just doing my job, he replied modestly. Margaret had also built a friendship with former detective Jennifer and, at her recommendation, began participating in a victim support group. There, she met people who had similar experiences and found comfort in knowing she wasn't alone. About a year after the trial, Margaret began taking a writing course at the local community college. She thought writing about her experience might provide healing. Eventually, she decided to compile her experiences into a book. Meanwhile, Richard became increasingly isolated in prison. Vanessa's family had abandoned him too, leaving him completely alone. All of Richard's appeals were rejected, and he would have to serve his full sentence. 5 years later, Margaret's book, Silent Poison, My Husband's Watch, became a bestseller and began to raise awareness about hidden domestic abuse. Letters from readers saying, "Your book saved my life," started arriving, as many women in similar situations became aware of their dangerous circumstances through her story. On the final day of her book launch events, Margaret spoke at a lecture on the theme, "What is a real family?" Blood relations or marital connections don't solely define family. We were too fixated on traditional family forms. But a real family consists of people who truly care about you and wish for your happiness. Pawn shop owner Albert and former detective Jennifer were listening to her speech in the front row. Though not related by blood, they had become true family to Margaret and Emily. I want to tell everyone here today, don't miss the warning signs. And don't be afraid to seek help. In any situation, there are people who truly care about you. They are your real family in the truest sense. Margaret's life began with a tragedy, but through that experience, she found a new family and began walking a path to save many others. Her wounds might never completely heal, but through them, she had become stronger and had grown.